Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you are interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, March 21st. The councils provide information and recommendations to the Federal Subsistence Board on subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing. For more information on the advisory councils and how to apply, call 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov. This message sponsored by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, Alaska's pipeline to the future, delivering oil today, sustaining operations for tomorrow, committed to safety, operating the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline since 1977.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888-4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm Meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is St. Patty's Day, if that matters to you. Happy St. Patty's Day. It's March 17th, and as always, we encourage you to visit our website for the very latest weather information, weather.gov/Alaska or weather.gov, and click on Alaska. And when you do that, you'll be taken to your nearest Weather Service office that serves your community and village, whether that's Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube during the afternoon. You get your daily afternoon map briefing that you can find from our website at weather.gov/Anchorage, or if you go to YouTube and type in NWS Anchorage, you'll find that daily briefing as well. After this show, of course, go to alaskapublic.org, our broadcast partner here, and you can get the entire broadcast of Alaska Weather. If you missed the front part and you want to watch the rest of it, you can certainly do it that way, or find it on YouTube later at AKWX TV. On we go to hazardous weather now, the only game in town. Winter weather advisories across eastern Norton Sound and parts of the lower Yukon Valley. Looking for snow to be relatively light and showery, but most cases we're going to be dealing with wind and blowing snow that could reduce visibility to about a half mile or less at times. This will go until about 9 o'clock tonight. Other than that, most areas are seeing weather that would be considered pretty typical for this time of the year. As we look out toward the Bering Sea, we'll watch for several areas of low pressure. We've got low pressure traveling from west-east in several waves across the North Pacific, and we also have a large area of low pressure spinning across Alaska at this point, especially across the west coast. Underneath that, there are several lobes attached to that overall trough of low pressure across the west coast. Once again, areas of low pressure, some of these a little bit stronger than others, traveling on the North Pacific side, are going to brush through the central Aleutians, and with that we expect storm force winds probably coming up on Tuesday for the Pacific side, just south of Adak and Atka, and that would be this storm here. As we look out across the rest of Alaska, once again, you can look at the large spiral structure here across the Norton Sound region and just to the west. That's the current weather pattern that's affecting most of Alaska at this point. It's brought in some spotty areas of rain to southern parts of southeast, a little bit of snow up around Haines, and drier weather for some parts of south central, although we did see some light snow showers in the region earlier this afternoon. Breaks in the clouds continue across the interior there. You'll continue under a partly to mostly cloudy sky, and across the north, areas of low clouds and fog should be expected, but where the weather is the worst again across the lower Yukon and the eastern sections of Norton Sound, mainly due to the wind blowing and drifting the snow around. Snow will continue in parts of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome and Shishmaref and up into Kotzebue Sound, and across the Bering Sea and through the Aleutians. Expect scattered snow showers to continue as a very unsettled pattern is expected to last at least into the midweek. Underneath this pattern here, we get that northwest flow, and some areas, even one of these little groups of clouds is probably producing some light precipitation passing through from time to time. That's what we would call showery precipitation. And again, that anywhere south of St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, and south of the ice edge is probably going to continue as we head through at least the midweek. Here's a look at the surface map. As of mid-afternoon, low pressure was traveling across the west coast in the YK Delta, producing some light snow out around Cape Newnham, up around Dillingham, northward toward Nome and the west coast, with a frontal boundary draped across the Brooks Range and just north. Flurries and some areas of fog expected across the coastal plain. That should continue. Notice the drier weather across the interior, a frontal boundary falling apart across the North Gulf Coast and across the western sections of the Alaska Range and lower Yukon, and also across the eastern parts of the Gulf. The next wave of low pressure will develop across the Pacific Northwest, starting with this leftover triple point low here. That will continue to bring in some light rain across southern parts of southeast. There's the snow we were seeing in Haines earlier today. Snow around Dutch Harbor in Alaska and also around the Pribilofs, with much drier weather back to the west. Looking ahead to tonight, a 986 millibar low will travel into the western Aleutians. This wave will bring some scattered areas of light rain and snow to the central and western parts of the chain. Notice this brief ridge here. It won't last very long, as we saw low pressure traveling quickly in from the North Pacific will affect the central Aleutians here as we get into late tonight and early tomorrow morning with stronger winds. Low pressure will travel northward just a little bit more, and bringing a risk of some rain and snow to parts of southeast. Better chance of snow farther north into Yakutat, Prince William Sound, and parts of the Kenai Peninsula. Don't be surprised to run into spotty areas of snow showers in Kenai and Soldotna and along the Seward Highway. Back to the west around Seward, the Seward Peninsula and the Kotzebue Sound region, blowing and drifting snow, still possible. Areas of light snow, maybe an inch or two, still possible there. And by later on tonight, the winter weather advisories will have expired, as around 9 o'clock is when we expect that to happen. High pressure still in charge of the interior. That may allow a few more clouds to move in, but overall the wind should be relatively calm. And you'll see a few more clouds develop as we head into tomorrow. And eventually that's going to allow for snow showers to move back into the Tanana Valley around Fairbanks, but probably not as early as Tuesday at this point. Looks like most of that stays back to the west. So flying weather and visibility should be relatively improved north of Mentasta all the way to the Brooks Range and points south. Back to the west, though, you'll notice a better chance for some spotty and kind of occasional snow showers there, with a break developing once again across the YK Delta. A few left behind snow showers in the morning around Bethel, probably in the morning around Kodiak, and then that should do it. You'll see a clearing sky later on in the day. High pressure closer to the Pribilofs and points west will signal the change for slightly warmer weather, but also windier weather for the eastern chain, the central Aleutians, and also the west. And here's that stronger storm that will likely bring in some storm force winds, at least on the south side of the central Aleutians. Now across the eastern parts of the Gulf, low pressure is working its way northward, closer and closer to Juneau, with colder air working up toward the coast at 1,000 millibars here. You'll notice areas of rain and snow redeveloping in scattered fashion. Better chance for some rain and snow to mix closer to Juneau during the day. A little bit farther north, though, it still looks like that could be some light snow around Haines and Skagway, and also scattered snow showers still possible around Prince William Sound and the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and the lower to mid-Yukon Valley. Again, Fairbanks still looking dry at this point. As we get to Wednesday, though, that dry period may come to an end. Opportunity for some scattered snow showers around the middle Tanana Valley and points east is possible as high pressure nudges itself just east of Nome there at 1,035 millibars. It's strong enough to break up the clouds across southwestern Alaska and Kodiak. Even the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula may break out for a while there. Precipitation still hovering over southeast as a trough of low pressure drops over the north and eastern Gulf there. Areas of rain and snow are expected. Our stronger low that was bringing some storm force winds to the central Aleutians is scooting eastward. It's now south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor by midweek. And the frontal boundary is mainly south of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula. We'll have some stronger winds moving over the southern tip of the peninsula there into Cold Bay and False Pass, probably Sand Point as well. Snow showers passing over the Pribilofs are expected, and another wave of low pressure is moving in. Now, there's a brief ridge of high pressure here across the western chain, but right behind it, again, you can see that next wave developing. And all of that right now looks to travel mainly from west to east across the extreme northern Pacific and into the western Gulf, thanks to our ridge sitting here just on the eastern side of Norton Sound. Across the Arctic coast, mainly east of Barrow, winds will still be blowing a little bit, and there may be areas of fog and light snow. And most of the interior at this point by midweek still looks pretty dry, with the winds picking up though across south central and southwest. Temperatures today were fairly mild around Sitka at 40 degrees. For the mid and lower parts of southeast, mid to upper 30s did the trick for Petersburg, Ketchikan, Annette, Hyder, all are in the mid 30s there. Juneau also seeing milder temperatures today. 33 in Yakutat. Prince William Sound a little bit colder up around Valdez, 28 degrees. You may see some stronger winds as we head into tomorrow for the Narrows. Not horrible, but again a little bit more than a breeze. 27 degrees around Kenai, 29 in Anchorage today, 27 in Talkeetna. Glen Allen was showing 22. Up the road around Healy, it was 16 degrees. Fairbanks showing 27, about 29 degrees in Eagle this afternoon, and 9 degrees as you went up the road toward Fort Yukon. Northway was 22. Inactuvic Pass, single digits there, 1 in Barrow. Kaktovik was looking at 10 degrees above zero, 18 around Point Hope, and up the road toward Point Lay, a little bit colder there, 20 degrees, 24 I should say, around Shishmaref, or Kotzebue at 7 in Shishmaref, 29 in Nome, 10 in St. Lawrence. And down the YK coast, you'll notice temperatures were in the lower to mid-teens for the most part. It was 12 in Hooper Bay, 22 in Bethel, and Grayling was looking at temperatures closer to 30 degrees with McGrath at 27. Bristol Bay readings were above freezing by mid-afternoon, 18 in St. Paul, 20 in St. George, and 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint about 39. Adak and Atka both in the mid-30s, expecting some wind tomorrow, and 29 in Attu. And the low temperatures tonight, look for temps above freezing for the chain until you get out to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. 28 there, 15 in St. Paul. Bristol Bay looking at low 20s, about 4 above in Bethel. Nome looking at 3, 9 below in Barrow, with the interior anywhere from 2 below in Fairbanks to 20 below in the Arctic Village region. 20s and 30s for South Central. Kodiak 29, lower to mid-30s for Southeast, with high temperatures tomorrow closing in on 40 degrees once again. Prince William Sound and South Central in the mid to upper 30s, 32 in Kodiak, 20s and 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, 34 around Dutch Harbor, and upper 30s around the central chain. 27 for the Pribilofs, 11 in Nunivak Island, about 10 in Nome. Unalakleet looking at 16 with McGrath at 29. Kotzebue Sound in the mid to upper teens. -1 in Barrow, and about the same there in Kaktovik. Wainwright not too far behind. And you'll notice temperatures in the interior anywhere from the teens to upper 20s. Some places south of Fairbanks approaching that freezing point once again. Flying weather shows IFR conditions across the Chukchi Seacoast and across the eastern parts of the Seward Peninsula into Norton Sound, and of course wrapping around our storm in the North Pacific and across the far western Bering. For the southeastern regions, mainly MVFR up and down southeast and well into the Gulf and across the western parts of the Alaska Range. Inactuvic Pass and Adigan Pass should both be VFR as we head into your Tuesday. Looking at the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are expected to turn over to MVFR conditions throughout the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass and Windy Pass, expected to drop in visibility. Isabel Pass should lean over toward MVFR. Tanita Pass at this point looks to be VFR. Mentasta Pass will likely be turning toward MVFR conditions throughout the day. Portage Pass should see some improvement, and Chilkoot and White Pass expected to be MVFR. Freezing levels show that rise in warmer weather out across the central and western parts of the chain. Meanwhile, warmer weather is also sneaking in at the higher altitudes there between 2,000 and 4,000 feet, heading over Haida Gwaii tomorrow. Freezing potential as far as icing goes below 8,000 feet across the central or middle Yukon Valley and across the Chukchi Seacoast. And wrapping around our storm in the North Pacific, you'll have to go below 12,000 feet, but above 4,000 feet to find at least some light to isolated icing potential there. Our jet stream shows a pretty wavy pattern right now. One area for opportunity for cold weather is going to bypass Alaska right now with stronger jet stream winds pointing that down toward the lower 48. As you look out across the Gulf and the North Pacific and the Bering Sea, that up and down jet stream pattern only indicates a very active pattern for us, and that is certainly a reason that we're seeing those storms lining up all the way out into eastern Asia. Right now, storm pattern is passing into southeastern Alaska, a brief break, and then a new opportunity for a storm to develop there in the North Pacific. 9,000 feet, see several concentrations of low pressure across the west coast, across northeastern parts of Alaska, and across the North Gulf Coast. This is dragging in those faster winds across the Alaska Peninsula right now. And with that, don't be surprised to run into some gap flow issues there as the winds tighten up a little bit more in the coming days. A southwesterly flow working across southeastern Alaska. And here's that southerly flow working across the central parts of the chain. Wind speeds there picking up very quickly to about 25 to as high as 60 knots. Now, as you get into 3,000 feet in the level here, high pressure stretching up across the central Bering Sea. This is slowly creeping eastward, and that will continue to improve the weather across the west. But in the meantime, it's dragging in that northerly flow across Kodiak Island, the west coast, and into south central Alaska. Wind speeds there could reach as high as 15 to 30 knots, and low pressure is wrapping that right into southern parts of southeast. Wind speeds across the interior are pretty light at this point. We've got a brief light westerly flow across the Brooks Range and sending itself northward across the Beaufort Seacoast. And across the central and western part of the chain, wind speeds there also picking up fairly quickly, anywhere from 35 to about 70 knots. So watch out for some chop there across the central and western parts of the Aleutians. As far as turbulence goes, then, we should expect some with storm force winds at the surface south of Adak and Eck as we get into tomorrow. Below 8,000 feet, do expect some gap flow issues there across the northern parts of the peninsula into Bristol Bay, and maybe even Kodiak Island and the southern tip there from a fog neck southward. Around Prince William Sound and South Central, there may still be some areas with some light chop, and across southeast with the pressure gradient there and the frontal boundary dying out. Don't be surprised to run into at least some bumps there and around the Bering Strait, generally below 6,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is well known to many of you, Rob Stapleton. Doesn't take very long when you're talking to Rob to realize that aviation's a big part of his DNA. He first started flying when his dad was getting his private. When he was young, he was involved with model aircraft, fixing and flying them. He soloed at 16, got his license at 17, came to Alaska in 1975, and has been flying the usual subjects, T-craft, J3, 150, 172, 180. He's also an advanced ground instructor. Rob got involved with Ultralights and Experimental Aircraft Association, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in tonight's program, or I'm going to get him on for another go at the EAA. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Harry. Glad to be here.
Well, you've lived all over Alaska. You've been a photojournalist on some pretty exciting adventures. 21 Iditarides. Let's start there. What's your favorite story?
I think the 1 second finish in 1978 between Rick Mackey and Rick Swinson. It was a race where they were kind of hopscotching across the state, and then it got down to safety, and they were only a few minutes apart, maybe 10 minutes apart, and then they actually finished sort of, one team was sort of right behind the other one in the chute, and then they had a big argument in the chute between the judges about, who won. Was it the first nose of the lead dog or the bow of the sled? And so it was a real exciting finish.
You also mentioned that you had done something rather unique in 1979, and this I think is incredible, involving a dog team. Tell our audience about that.
Well, in my years covering the Iditarod, I got to know Joe Reddington, father of the Iditarod, and Susan Butcher, a protege of his, quite well. And Joe invited me to go on an expedition, and I didn't really take him seriously until I got a phone call one day saying, we're leaving to go climb Mount McKinley with a dog team. Are you going with us? And I said, yeah, okay, I guess so. So I went, never climbed a mountain before, never had on snowshoes before. I was an avid skier when I was a young boy, and so I wasn't really intimidated by anything other than the fact that there was a lot of unknown there. So I guess it was trial by fire. We took 7 dogs up on the mountain, and took about 5 weeks, but we made it to the summit with the dogs in harness with a sled.
That's pretty incredible. And I'll bet you there's a lot of our audience out there that, like me, had no idea. That's a pretty neat story. Unfortunately, I'm going to run out of time if I'm not careful. I want to ask you a couple things about safety and about aviation safety, and I want to do it a little bit differently. You're a pilot, but I want you to think out your answer as if you're a passenger, because you've been a passenger in a lot of airplanes, doing a lot of what you've just been talking about. So what do you expect from the pilot when you're sitting in the right seat or the back seat as far as pre-flight briefing, for example?
Well, it's correct. I've been a passenger quite a bit. In my work, most of the time I couldn't fly and shoot. I had to contract with somebody to fly, and I got a lot of right seat time. But most of the time, the best pilots I feel are the ones that tell you what you're going to, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what the plan B is. Basically discusses all of the safety equipment, seat belts, where the ELT is, where the survival gear is, just basic survival scenarios. If we go down here and we're off airport, you know, what's the best thing to do? If I'm injured, this is what you can do, so on and so forth. Just good instruction about what we're doing and on every flight, and always having an alternative. And you know, there have been times where we've used it, and you know, I've been in a mid-air collision. I was in a whiteout where a guy just chopped the power, and we went down on a slew and busted landing gear on a 170. Been in a helicopter when I had an engine out, so I'm pretty familiar with scenarios.
Well, I appreciate you describing what you look for, and I hope our audience out there expects the same thing of the pilots that they fly with. A good safety briefing like that is very important, and also an understanding of what your role as a crew member is.
Absolutely.
You know, looking for traffic and
Right.
helping in any way you can.
Another set of eyes, you know, especially in scenarios, especially like the Iditarod, where there's a lot of aircraft flying around. You know, where are they? You know, the pilot's paying attention to, you know, to basically to fly in the airplane, and he's looking, and you know, he's looking for one thing and then asks you to look for another thing. I think it's really, you know, it's really good to be helpful and tuned into what the pilot needs.
Right. Well, as I thought, I've run out of time here. I want to get you back on the program, but before we leave tonight, I want you to talk about something you're doing on Monday, March 24th. You just got less than 30 seconds, but talk a little bit about the presentation you're going to do.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the early days flying on the Iditarod and then sort of compare it to today's Iditarod Air Force. When I first started flying on the race, you know, in 1975, 76, things were very different, and I'll be glad to describe it for you, but you may not believe it.
So this is Monday, March 24th, 6:30, Alaska Aviation Museum.
Alaska Aviation Museum. It's a new lecture series that they're starting.
Great. Thanks for being on the program tonight.
Thank you, Harry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. Until next week, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. Here's a look at the updated Sea Ice Edge from this afternoon's analysis from our Sea Ice program at the Anchorage Weather Office. You'll see that Ice Edge is not too far off again from St. Paul. The leading edge of that, of course, would be Strips, with more of a northwesterly flow becoming a little bit more southerly in time. Again, that's probably about as far south as it's going to go, at least in the very near future. If you'd like to take a look at this yourself, you can see the different concentrations and the analysis, as well as a written discussion of what's going on in the Bering Sea. I encourage you to do that anytime by going to weather.gov/ice.php there, and you can also download the tools you need to make a map like this on Google Earth or whatever type mapping program you'd like to use. So all that information is online. Again, the next update for the Sea Ice Edge will be on Wednesday. As we look at southeast, you'll notice the frontal boundary working right up against the coast, a north and westerly flow out there around Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather. More of a westerly flow developing during the day, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, with seas ranging between 11 and about 15 feet as you get closer to the Dixon entrance. Southeasterlies in the southern passages, 5 to 8 foot seas are expected there. A southwesterly flow around Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound, and more of a northerly flow, of course, in the Lynn Canal at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. As we get into Wednesday, you should expect that northerly flow to continue. Winds will still be a little variable as you head through the inner passages there. Also look for an offshore flow south of Yakutat, a 15-knot wind with an 8-foot sea, and still looking at an onshore flow all the way from Gustavus and the northern entrances down toward the southern entrances with 10 to 14-foot seas as we get into the midweek. For South Central, pretty broad northwesterly flow will be controlling the weather in the north and western Gulf, across the Cook Inlet and all the way down toward Kenai and into the Barren Islands. You'll notice it picks up a little bit here on the west and eastern ends of the Barren Islands. 30-knot wind there west of the Barrens with 8-foot seas. A southwesterly flow inside Shelikof Strait, and northwesterlies east of Kodiak Island. 20-knot winds there with a 12-foot sea. 15-knot winds inside Prince William Sound. That will switch around to more of a lighter northeasterly flow on Wednesday, but you'll need to watch out for some breezier conditions inside the Narrows. Northerlies outside of Prince William Sound and out east of the Barren Islands, 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. And the winds are also diminishing by this point as we get into the Cook Inlet. A northeasterly drainage wind, 10 knots coming all the way down the inlet. A northwesterly flow, though, inside Shelikof Strait with a 2-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies around Bristol Bay, northeasterlies north of Cold Bay with an 8-foot sea, and freezing spray is still a possibility there. Northwesterlies east of Chignik and south of Kodiak Island, and 9-foot seas are expected south of Sand Point on that 20-knot wind from the north and east. Looking at Wednesday, the winds shift a little bit more to the east and southeast, now wrapping into that stronger area of low pressure also to the west and to the southwest. Look for 15 to 30 knot winds south of the peninsula and 20 to 25 knot winds across the Bering Sea, 4 to 7 foot seas on the north side and 3 to 13 foot seas on the south side. Pretty big difference there. As we get into Tuesday, the stronger winds will be south of Adak and Atka, with storm force winds developing here as that low pressure system is just kind of grazing the Aleutians and scooting eastward. A stronger southeasterly flow will continue across the central and eastern parts of the chain. You'll notice wind speeds already subsiding quickly across the west and west central parts of the chain at 25 to 35 knots. Seas diminish quickly by Wednesday, still looking at 13 to 17 foot seas on the Pacific side, 11 to 15 foot seas on the Bering Sea side, with winds anywhere from 20 to about 30 knots, and northeasterlies already developing on the backside of that storm, with seas dropping to 12 to 14 foot seas there as we get into Wednesday afternoon. Across the west, a westerly flow zipping across St. Lawrence Island there at 35 knots, more of a northwesterly flow coming across Nunivak Island and Kuskokwim Bay, and southeasterlies from the Pribilofs northward toward the St. Matthew Island waters, 15 knots. Those will pick up a little bit more as we head into Wednesday, 25 to 35 knots across the southern Bering. North of the ice edge, that's 25 to 30 knots there, with 25 knots from the south coming across St. Lawrence Island. And that southerly flow will develop over the Bering Strait as well as we get into Wednesday here. At easterly flow zipping across the Beaufort seacoast, 20 to 25 knots. Westerlies coming into Kotzebue Sound at 30 knots. And then by Wednesday, you can see that southerly flow punching all the way up into the Chukchi coast. A pretty brisk wind there across Point Lay at 30 knots from the south and west. Easterlies continue across the Beaufort seacoast at 25 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, winter weather advisories will continue for eastern Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Valley until 9 o'clock there. It's mainly a blowing snow issue, though you will have some accumulating snow across the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound and also parts of the lower Yukon Valley and into Bristol Bay. Low pressure across the northern Gulf combined with low pressure across the eastern Gulf and another storm out to the west will keep a very active pattern going across Alaska. Look for scattered snow showers mainly in the west on Tuesday and up around the Kotzebue Sound region. The interior should be dry with rain and snow in southeast. A strong storm in the North Pacific, and that will subside as we get into Wednesday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you are interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, March 21st. The councils provide information and recommendations to the Federal Subsistence Board on subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing. For more information on the advisory councils and how to apply, call 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov. This message sponsored by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.